birthday, 18M, was raised by two people who loved me more than anything. My life was simple, and it was good. My mom, Sarah, and my dad, Mark, were my whole world. They were kind and supportive, though sometimes a little too protective. They never let me stay out too late. They always needed to know where I was. I used to think it was just because I was their only child. I thought they were just typical worried parents. I had no reason to believe anything else. My childhood was filled with birthday parties, family vacations to the lake, and scraped knees that my mom would always fix with a kiss and a bandage. It was normal. It was mine. Or so I thought. On my 18th birthday, everything changed. We had a small celebration at home. Just the three of us. After I blew out the candles on my cake, my parents looked at each other with a strange, heavy expression. It was a look I had never seen before. It was a mixture of fear and sadness. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something was wrong. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was cold and trembling. "Alex, honey, there is something we have needed to tell you for a very long time," she began, her voice barely a whisper. Mark cleared his throat and sat up straighter, trying to look strong, but his eyes betrayed him. They were filled with a deep, unsettling sorrow. "We wanted to wait until you were an adult," he said. "Until you were old enough to understand." "Understand what?" I asked. My own voice sounded small and distant. Sarah took a deep breath. The words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for years. And they were finally breaking free. "We are not your biological parents, Alex," she said. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The cheerful remnants of my birthday celebration, the colorful balloons and half-eaten cake, suddenly felt like props in a play I did not know I was in. I stared at them, trying to process what she had just said. It did not make any sense. These were the people who had raised me. They had taught me how to ride a bike. They had held me when I was sick. They were my parents. "What are you talking about?" I asked, pulling my hand away from hers. "We found you," Mark said, his voice cracking. "It was a long time ago. You were just a little boy. You were alone." He went on to tell me a story that sounded like something out of a movie. He said they found me in a park, sitting on a bench all by myself. I was crying. I was barely old enough to talk. He said there was a note pinned to my little jacket. It said my name was Alex, and it asked for whoever found me to please take care of me. They said they waited for hours, hoping someone would come back for me, but no one ever did. Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "We fell in love with you the moment we saw you," she said. "We wanted a baby so badly, and then there you were. It felt like a miracle." They told me they were scared to go to the police. They were afraid that the system would take me away, that I would be lost in a sea of foster homes. So they made a decision. They decided to keep me. They decided to raise me as their own son. They never legally adopted me, they explained, because they were afraid that the process would uncover the truth and they would lose me. They did it all, they said, to protect me. I did not know what to feel. I was shocked. I was confused. A part of me was angry, but another part of me felt a strange wave of gratitude. They had taken me in. They had given me a home. They had loved me. How could I be angry at them for that? I looked at their tear-streaked faces, their desperate eyes pleading for me to understand. And in that moment, I chose to believe them. I chose to forgive them. I hugged them both, and we cried together. I thought that was the end of the secrets. I thought that now, with the truth out in the open, we could finally move forward as a family. I was so wrong. The real story was just beginning, and it was far darker than I could have ever imagined. Life continued, but with a new, strange undercurrent. Every look from my parents now felt different. Every "I love you" seemed to carry a hidden weight. I tried to push it down, to pretend that nothing had fundamentally changed, but it was impossible. My entire identity had been built on a foundation that had just crumbled. I was not who I thought I was. I found myself looking in the mirror, searching my own face for clues of a life I never knew. Who did I look like? Where did my blue eyes come from? Mark and Sarah both had brown eyes. It was a small detail I had never paid much attention to before, but now it felt like a glaring inconsistency. A week after my birthday, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, our new, fragile normal was shattered. There was a knock at the door. It was a firm, official-sounding knock. Not the friendly tap of a neighbor or the quick rap of a delivery person. Mark and Sarah both froze. They exchanged that same look of fear I had seen on my birthday. "I will get it," I said, trying to sound casual as I stood up from the living room couch. "No, wait, Alex," Mark said, his voice sharp with panic. But it was too late. I was already at the door. I opened it to find two police officers standing on our porch. One was younger, with a serious expression. The other was older, with tired eyes that seemed to have seen too much. He introduced himself as Detective Miller. "Good afternoon," Detective Miller said, his gaze sweeping past me to my parents, who were now standing frozen in the hallway. "I am looking for Mark and Sarah Jensen." "That is us," my dad said, his voice strained. "Is there a problem, officer?" Detective Miller did not answer right away. Instead, he held up a piece of paper. It was a flyer, a missing person poster. My heart started to pound in my chest. He held it out for me to see. On the poster was a picture of a little boy, maybe 2 or 3 years old. He had big blue eyes and a small, serious mouth. Below the childhood photo was another image, this one created by a computer. It was an age progression photo, showing what that little boy might look like as a young man of 18. I stared at the face on the poster. My own face stared back at me. It was me. There was no doubt. It was an artist's rendering, but it was unmistakably me. My blood ran cold. I could hear a buzzing sound in my ears. I looked down at the name printed in bold letters at the top of the poster. It was not Alex. The name was Ethan. Ethan Miller. My world, which had already been cracked, now split wide open. "We have reason to believe that the boy you call Alex is actually Ethan Miller," the detective said, his voice calm and steady, but his eyes were fixed on Mark and Sarah. "He was taken from his home 16 years ago. We would like to come in and ask a few questions." I looked from the poster to my parents. Sarah had her hand over her mouth, her face pale as a ghost. Mark looked like he was about to be sick. Their story about finding me in a park, about the note, about saving me from the system, it all evaporated in an instant. It was a lie. It had all been a lie. And as the detective stepped across our threshold, I knew that my life would never, ever be the same. The people I had called Mom and Dad were not my saviors. They were my kidnappers. Detective Miller and the younger officer stepped inside. The air in our small house immediately felt thick and heavy, charged with unspoken accusations and years of hidden secrets. My parents, Mark and Sarah, looked like trapped animals. They guided the officers to the living room, their movements stiff and unnatural. I followed them, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I sat down on the armchair opposite the couch where my parents sat, feeling like a spectator at the demolition of my own life. "So," Detective Miller began, his tone even and professional. He took a small notebook and a pen from his jacket pocket. "You are Mark and Sarah Jensen, and this is your son, Alex." "Yes," Mark said, his voice tight. "He is our son." "Funny," the detective said, not looking up from his notebook. "Because we have no record of an Alex Jensen being born 18 years ago. No birth certificate, no hospital records. It is as if he did not exist until you enrolled him in kindergarten." Sarah flinched as if she had been struck. "We already explained this to Alex," she said, her voice trembling. "We found him. He was abandoned. We took him in. We gave him a home." Detective Miller finally looked up. His gaze was sharp and penetrating. "You found him," he repeated slowly as if testing the words. Where exactly did you find him? In a park, Mark said quickly. It was a park near the lake. He was all alone on a bench. He had a note, Sarah added, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. It said his name was Alex and to take care of him. We did what the note asked. We took care of him. I watched them, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. They were sticking to the story they had told me, the story I had so readily believed. But now, with the police in our living room and a missing person poster with my face on it, the story sounded flimsy and pathetic. It sounded like a lie. A note, Detective Miller said, a hint of skepticism in his voice. Do you still have this note? Mark and Sarah exchanged a quick, panicked glance. No, Mark said after a moment. It was so long ago. We must have lost it. I see, the detective said. He leaned forward slightly. Let me tell you about another little boy. A boy named Ethan Miller. He disappeared from his backyard 16 years ago. It was just 2 towns over from here. His parents were devastated. They have spent every single day since then looking for him. They never gave up hope. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Sarah started to cry softly, her shoulders shaking. Mark put a protective arm around her, but his own face was a mask of pure terror. The resemblance is uncanny, Detective Miller continued, gesturing towards me. We received an anonymous tip. Someone who knew you back then, knew you were desperate for a child and then suddenly had one. They saw the age-progressed photo of Ethan online and put 2 and 2 together. An anonymous tip. Someone had known. Someone had watched this lie unfold for 16 years and had only now decided to speak up. The thought made me feel sick. This is all a terrible mistake, Mark said, his voice rising in desperation. Alex is our son. You have no right to come in here and make these wild accusations. We are not making accusations, Mr. Jensen, the detective said calmly. We are investigating a crime. A very serious crime. He then turned his attention to me. His eyes were softer now, filled with something that looked like pity. Alex, he said, using the name I had always known. We would like to get a DNA sample, a simple cheek swab. It would clear this all up very quickly. This was it, the moment of truth. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, begging me to refuse, to stand with them, to protect their secret. For a fleeting second, I almost did. They were the only parents I had ever known. Despite the lie, they had loved me. But then I looked at the poster again, which the younger officer had placed on the coffee table. The face of the little boy, Ethan. My face. He deserved the truth. I deserved the truth. I looked straight at Detective Miller. I will do it, I said, my voice clear and steady, surprising even myself. I want to know the truth. The sound that escaped my mother's lips was a strangled sob. My dad's face hardened, his look of fear replaced by one of cold, sharp anger. He was not angry at the police. He was angry at me. In that single moment, I saw the truth more clearly than ever before. Their love had never been about me. It had been about possessing me. And now that they were about to lose me, their love was turning into something ugly. The detective nodded slowly, a look of understanding in his eyes. He knew he had just witnessed the first crack in a family built on a stolen child. After the police left, the silence in the house was deafening. They had taken my DNA sample, a simple swab from the inside of my cheek that felt like it carried the weight of my entire past and future. Detective Miller had been kind and reassuring. He gave me his card and told me to call him if I needed anything or if I remembered anything. He said the results would take a few days to find out if my life was a lie. I already knew the answer. I could see it in the terrified faces of the 2 people I had called my parents. They did not speak to me. They just sat on the couch, huddled together, whispering to each other. They looked like strangers. I went up to my room and closed the door, but I could not shut out the feeling of betrayal that was suffocating me. I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. 16 years. They had lied to me for 16 years. Every bedtime story, every birthday cake, every "I'm proud of you, son" was tainted. It was all part of an elaborate deception designed to keep me with them. A cold fury began to replace the shock. They had not saved me. They had stolen me. They had stolen me from another family, a family that had spent almost 2 decades searching for me. Did I have a real mother? A real father? Brothers or sisters? The questions bombarded me, each one more painful than the last. I had to know more. I could not just wait for the DNA results. I needed to find my own answers. My mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of a life I could not remember. I thought about the strange rules of our house. We never had family photos from before I was about 4 years old. When I asked, Sarah always said they had been lost in a basement flood. We never visited any extended family. They always said their parents had passed away and they had lost touch with everyone else. It had all seemed plausible at the time, but now it was clear. They were isolating me. They were erasing my past and ensuring no one from their own past could ask questions. I decided to start in the one place they always told me to stay out of, the attic. It was dusty and filled with old boxes, a place for forgotten things. If they were hiding anything, it would be up there. I waited until I heard them go into their bedroom and close the door. The house was quiet. I pulled down the folding stairs in the hallway ceiling, the creak of the springs sounding unnervously loud in the silent house. I climbed up into the darkness, using the flashlight on my phone to guide my way. The attic was just as I remembered from the few times I had snuck up there as a kid. It was hot and smelled of old wood and dust. Cardboard boxes were stacked everywhere, labeled with my dad's neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, old clothes, schoolwork. I started opening them, my hands shaking slightly. I sifted through my own past, my old drawings, my report cards, my childhood toys. It was all a carefully constructed history of Alex Jensen. But it was not me. After searching for nearly an hour, I was about to give up. It all seemed to be exactly what it looked like. Stored memories. Then I saw it. Tucked away in a dark corner behind a stack of old magazines was a small, unlabeled wooden box. It was different from the others. It was not a standard moving box. It was older, more personal. My heart started to beat faster. I pulled it out into the dim light. It was not locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed tissue paper, were a few small items. The first thing I saw was a tiny t-shirt. It was faded blue with a cartoon dinosaur on the front. It was so small it could have only fit a toddler. I picked it up. The fabric was soft and worn. It felt strangely familiar, though I could not place the memory. Beneath the shirt was something else. A small silver locket on a delicate chain. It was tarnished with age. I picked it up and fumbled with the clasp. It sprang open. Inside were 2 tiny pictures. On one side was a photo of a smiling woman with kind eyes in the same shade of blue as mine. On the other side was a man with a wide, happy grin. They were young and full of life. They were complete strangers to me. But as I stared at their faces, a deep, primal part of me recognized them. These were my parents. My real parents. A wave of grief and anger washed over me so intensely that I almost dropped the locket. They had kept this from me. They had hidden my real parents away in a box in the attic, as if they could erase them from existence. There was one more thing in the box. A folded piece of paper. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle with age. I carefully unfolded it. The headline read, "Local toddler vanishes from backyard." I scanned the article. It told the story of Ethan Miller, age 2, who disappeared without a trace. It mentioned his parents, David and Laura Miller. It described the clothes he was last seen wearing, a blue t-shirt with a dinosaur on it. I dropped the newspaper clipping as if it had burned my hand. It was all true. Everything the detective had said. I was Ethan, and the people sleeping down the hall were not my parents. They were the reason my real parents had suffered for 16 years. I sat there in the dusty darkness of the attic, holding the proof of my stolen life in my hands. The fury I felt was a clean, cold flame. They had not just lied to me, they had erased me, and I was going to make them face what they had done. I carefully placed everything back in the wooden box except for the locket. I slipped the chain over my head, tucking the small silver heart under my shirt. It felt cool against my skin, a tangible link to a life I had never known. I needed to feel that connection. I needed it to fuel my resolve. I closed the box and pushed it back into its hiding place in the corner, making sure it was completely concealed. Then I quietly made my way down from the attic, pulling the stairs up behind me. The house was still silent. Mark and Sarah were still in their room, probably sleeping, oblivious to the fact that their carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. I went back to my room and sat on my bed, the locket a heavy weight on my chest. I opened it again and stared at the faces of my real parents. Laura and David, my mother and father. I said their names aloud in a whisper. They felt foreign on my tongue. I wondered what they were doing right now. Were they asleep? Were they thinking of me? Detective Miller had said they never gave up hope. For 16 years, they had been waiting for their son to come home. And for 16 years, I had been living just 2 towns away, oblivious, living a lie. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Sarah tried to make breakfast, moving around the kitchen with a forced cheerfulness that was painful to watch. Mark sat at the table, staring into his coffee cup, his face grim. Neither of them met my eyes. They were waiting. We were all waiting for the DNA results to make this real. But for me, it was already real. The locket under my shirt was my proof. I decided to confront them, but not with everything. Not yet. I needed to see how they would react, to catch them in their own web of lies. I walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table across from Mark. Sarah placed a plate of pancakes in front of me. I pushed it away. "I am not hungry," I said. Sarah's fake smile faltered. "Alex, you need to eat something." "I have a question," I said, my voice steady. I looked directly at Sarah. "Where did you get this?" I pulled the locket out from under my shirt and held it up. Her face went completely white. She stared at the locket as if it were a ghost. She looked at Mark, her eyes wide with panic. Mark's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what it was. "Where did you get that?" Sarah stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "I found it," I said simply. "In the attic. You said all the old stuff was lost in a flood. Looks like you missed a box." "That was a gift," Sarah said, recovering slightly, though her hands were trembling. "It was from my aunt. She passed away a long time ago, before you came to us." "Your aunt?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "The one you never talk about? The one I have never seen a picture of? What was her name?" Sarah opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She could not come up with a name. The lie was too fresh, too clumsy. Mark stepped in, his voice low and menacing. "Put that away, Alex. You should not have been snooping in the attic. That is private." "Private?" I shot back, my anger flaring. "My entire life has been one big secret, and you want to talk to me about privacy? This locket has pictures in it. Who are they?" I opened it and pushed it across the table towards them. "Are they more relatives I have never heard of?" They both stared at the tiny photos of David and Laura Miller. They had no answer. Their silence was their confession. They knew exactly who those people were. They had known for 16 years. "I thought so," I said, standing up. I picked up the locket and put it back around my neck. "You can keep your lies. I am going out." "Where are you going?" Mark demanded, standing up as well. The old, controlling reflex was still there. "For a walk," I said, turning my back on them. "Do not worry. I will not get lost." I walked out of the house, letting the screen door slam behind me. I did not know where I was going, but I knew I could not stay in that house for another second. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. I walked for what felt like miles, my mind racing. Their reaction to the locket had confirmed my worst fears. They were not just liars. They were deliberate and cruel. They had not just hidden my past, they had tried to erase it, hiding away the only piece of my real family I had left. I pulled out my phone and called the only person I knew I could trust. My best friend, Liam. "Hey, what is up?" he answered, his voice cheerful. "Liam, I need you," I said, my own voice sounding shaky and broken. "Can you meet me? Something has happened." "Of course, man. Where are you?" I told him I was at the park by the river, and he said he would be there in 10 minutes. I sat down on a bench and waited, clutching the locket in my hand. When Liam arrived, he took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. "Dude, what is it? You look like you have seen a ghost," he said, sitting down next to me. And so I told him. I told him everything. About my birthday, about the police, about the missing person poster with my face on it. I told him about the attic, the t-shirt, the newspaper clipping, and the locket. I showed him the pictures of my real parents. Liam listened patiently, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to outright anger on my behalf. He did not interrupt me once. When I was finished, he just sat there for a moment, shaking his head in disbelief. "I cannot believe it," he said finally. "Your parents, Mark and Sarah, they stole you?" "It looks that way," I said, my voice hollow. "That is not just messed up, Alex. That is a crime. A huge one." He looked at me, his eyes serious. "What are you going to do?" "I do not know," I admitted. "The police are waiting for the DNA results, but I need more. I need to know why, and I need to find out more about him, about Ethan." "Okay," Liam said, his voice firm with purpose. "Then that is what we will do. We will find out everything we can about Ethan Miller." He pulled out his laptop from his backpack. Right there on that park bench, we started our own investigation. Liam was a genius with computers, and it did not take him long to find what we were looking for. We searched for Ethan Miller missing and David and Laura Miller. The internet was filled with the ghost of my past. There were old news articles from the time of my disappearance filled with grainy photos of police searching the woods behind my old house. There were links to a website my biological parents had set up, a digital shrine to their lost son, filled with photos and pleas for any information. We scrolled through the pictures. There I was, a chubby-cheeked baby in a high chair, a toddler taking my first steps, a little boy with a bright, happy smile, sitting on a man's shoulders, my father, David. In another picture, a woman was holding me, her face buried in my hair, a look of pure love in her eyes. My mother, Laura. Seeing them, seeing myself with them, was like watching a home movie from another dimension. It was a life I should have had, a life that had been stolen from me. Then we found something that made my blood run cold. It was a link to an online forum, a cold case community where amateur detectives discussed unsolved mysteries. Someone had recently started a new thread about Ethan Miller's disappearance. We read through the comments. People offered theories, condolences, and memories. One comment stood out. It was from a user who claimed to have been a neighbor of the Millers back then. The comment read, "I always thought it was strange. The police questioned everyone, but they cleared that handyman who was working on their fence that week. He always gave me a weird vibe. He and his wife were desperate for a baby. Then, a few months later, they moved away suddenly. And I heard they had a new son. Probably just a coincidence." Liam and I looked at each other. "A handyman," I whispered. "What was his name?" Liam asked, scrolling down, looking for more comments from the same user. He found one. Someone asked for the handyman's name. Here it is. He pointed to the screen. The name on the screen was Marcus. Marcus. My dad's name was Mark. It was short for Marcus. A wave of nausea washed over me. It could not be a coincidence. My dad was a handyman. I had grown up watching him fix things around the house. He had the tools. He had the skills. And according to this anonymous internet commenter, he had been working at my family's house the week I disappeared. "Alex, this is it," Liam said, his voice low and intense. "This is everything." He was right. This was not just a suspicion anymore. This was a motive. This was a direct link. Mark and Sarah had not just stumbled upon an abandoned child. They had targeted me. They had planned this. They had seen a child, decided they wanted him, and they had taken him. The cold, calculated nature of it was monstrous. I needed to test this new information. I needed to see their faces when I brought it up. I went home that evening with a new, heavier weight on my shoulders. I found Mark and Sarah in the kitchen, sitting in silence. They looked up as I walked in, their faces etched with anxiety. I decided to start with the inconsistency in their original story. "I was thinking about what you said," I began, my voice deliberately calm. "About the day you found me." They both tensed up. "You said it was at a park, Dad," I said, looking at Mark. "The one by the lake." "That is right," he said, nodding slowly. Then I turned to Sarah. "But Mom, I seem to remember you telling me once that it was at a bus station. You said I was sitting on a bench near the ticket counter." Sarah's eyes darted nervously towards Mark. "Did I? I do not remember saying that. It was so long ago, Alex. The details get fuzzy." "Fuzzy?" I repeated. It seems like a pretty important detail to get fuzzy. Finding your son. You would think you would remember exactly where it happened. "Do not twist our words, Alex," Mark said, his voice sharp. "We remember it perfectly. It was the park." "Okay," I said, holding up my hands in a gesture of surrender. "The park. I just have one more question. Did you do a lot of handyman work back then? Before you got the office job?" The question hung in the air between us. It was so specific, so out of the blue that it caught them completely off guard. Mark's face, which had been tight with anger, suddenly went slack with shock. He looked at me, his eyes wide, and for the first time I saw genuine fear. Not fear of the police, but fear of me. Fear that I knew. "Why would you ask that?" he stammered. "Just curious," I said with a shrug, turning to leave the room. "You never talk much about what you did before I came along." I walked away, leaving them in a state of stunned silence. I had my confirmation. The mention of his old job had terrified him. He knew I was getting closer to the truth. The game had changed. I was no longer just the victim in this story. I was the one hunting for the truth. And I was getting closer with every question I asked. The walls they had built around their lie were starting to crumble, brick by brick, and I was going to be the one to push them over. The days that followed were a strange and silent war. I lived in the same house as Mark and Sarah, but we were like ghosts haunting the same space. We barely spoke. Meals were eaten in silence. The air was thick with things unsaid. They watched my every move, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resentment. They knew I was digging, and they were terrified of what I would find. But I had already found it. Now, I was just waiting for the right moment. Detective Miller called 2 days later. "Alex," he said, his voice grave. "The DNA results are back. It is a conclusive match. You are Ethan Miller." I closed my eyes. Hearing it officially, hearing a police officer confirm it, made it undeniably real. I was Ethan. Alex was a name given to me by my kidnappers. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We have enough to bring them in for questioning," he said. "With the DNA match, we can get a warrant. But a confession would make the case much stronger. Do you think they would be willing to talk?" "Not to you," I said. "But maybe to me." "Be careful, son," the detective warned. "These people are desperate. We do not know what they are capable of." "I know," I said, but I need to do this. I need to hear them say it. We agreed on a plan. I would try to get them to confess. Detective Miller told me to call him if I felt I was in any danger. He also told me something that solidified my resolve. My biological parents, David and Laura, had been notified about the DNA match. They were ecstatic, overwhelmed with joy and disbelief. They wanted to see me. They have been waiting 16 years, Ethan, Detective Miller said gently. They are driving down now. They will be in town tomorrow. Tomorrow. I was going to meet my real parents tomorrow. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. But before I could meet them, before I could start my new life as Ethan, I had to end my old one as Alex. I had to confront Mark and Sarah and make them face the truth of what they had done. I decided to set my trap. I needed to make them feel safe, to make them believe they had gotten away with it. That evening, I went downstairs and found them sitting in the living room, watching TV, pretending everything was normal. "Hey," I said, standing in the doorway. They both looked up, surprised that I was speaking to them. "I got a call from Detective Miller," I said. I paused, letting the tension build. I saw the flash of panic in their eyes. The DNA results came back. Sarah gasped and put her hand to her mouth. Mark just stared at me, his face pale. "It was inconclusive," I lied. "He said the sample must have been contaminated. Just a weird coincidence," he said. "They are closing the investigation." The relief that washed over their faces was disgusting. It was a physical transformation. The tension left their shoulders. The fear drained from their eyes. Sarah started to cry, but this time they were tears of relief. Mark let out a long, shaky breath and pulled her into a hug. "Oh, thank God," Sarah whispered, burying her face in his shoulder. Mark looked over at me, a weak, triumphant smile on his face. "See?" he said. "I told you it was all a mistake. Just a crazy coincidence. Now we can finally put all of this behind us and be a family again." "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "A family." The ease with which they accepted my lie, the sickening relief on their faces, it was all the proof I needed. They were guilty, and they thought they were safe. That was their biggest mistake. They had underestimated me. They had no idea that I was just getting started. The final act was about to begin, and I was going to be the one directing it. I went back to my room, my heart pounding with a cold, hard resolve. Tomorrow they would pay for what they did. The next day felt like the longest of my life. I had to act normal. I had to pretend that I believed their lies, that I was ready to forgive and forget. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. I ate the breakfast Sarah made for me. I listened as Mark talked about his plans for the garden. It all felt like a surreal play. We were all actors, saying our lines, but the script was about to be set on fire. While they were distracted, believing their nightmare was over, I made my final preparations. I called Liam. "It is happening tonight," I told him. "I need your help." "Whatever you need, man. I am here," he said, his voice steady and supportive. I told him about the final pieces of the puzzle I had found. Liam had been helping me try to access the old family computer that was stored in the basement. It was ancient, but Mark was a pack rat who never threw anything away. He was also meticulous about backing up his files. We had been looking for anything from 16 years ago. After I told him about the handyman story, Liam knew what to search for. He had spent the previous night remotely accessing the old hard drive, and he had found it. The smoking gun. "I found a folder of old photos," Liam said, his voice tense with excitement. "From about 17 years ago, before you. And Alex, you're not going to believe this." He sent the photo to my phone. My hands were shaking as I opened it. It was a picture of a much younger Mark. He was standing in front of a house, smiling at the camera. He was wearing work clothes. A tool belt slung around his waist. In the background, partially obscured by a tree, was a child's swing set and a blue house. "Now look at this," Liam said, and sent another image. It was a screenshot from the news articles about Ethan Miller's disappearance. It was a picture of the police searching the backyard of the Miller home. It was the same house, the same swing set, the same distinct blue siding. There was no question. Mark had been there. He had worked there. His lie about finding me in a park was not just a lie. It was a pathetic attempt to distance himself from the scene of his crime. But that was not all Liam had found. He had recovered fragments of deleted emails from the same time period, emails between Mark and Sarah. They were heartbreaking to read. They detailed their struggles with infertility, their failed treatments, their fading hopes of ever having a child. And then there was the last one. An email from Mark to Sarah, dated just 3 days before I was taken. The subject line was simple: a solution. The email read, "Sarah, my love, I think I found a way. I am doing a small job for a family a few towns over. They have a little boy, the perfect little boy. And they are so careless. They leave the back gate open all the time. He just wanders around the yard unsupervised. We could give him a better life. A life with parents who would cherish him, who would never take their eyes off him. We could have the family we have always dreamed of. Think about it. We could be happy." I had to read it 3 times before the words fully sank in. It was a confession. A premeditated plan to steal a child. They had not just seen an opportunity, they had created one. They had rationalized it, convincing themselves that they were saving me, that they would be better parents. The arrogance, the selfishness of it took my breath away. "I have it all," I told Liam. "The photo, the emails. It is more than enough." "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I am going to confront them," I said. "And then I am calling Detective Miller. But first, I need them to admit it to my face." That evening, I set the stage. I asked Sarah if we could have a special dinner, just the 3 of us, to celebrate getting past all the craziness. She was thrilled. She saw it as a sign that her son was back, that her family was whole again. She made my favorite meal. Mark opened a bottle of sparkling cider. They were positively giddy with relief. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where they had first told me their story about finding me. The irony was not lost on me. "I am so glad this is all over," Sarah said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I was so scared we were going to lose you." "Me too," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I let them talk for a few minutes, let them bask in their false sense of security. Then I made my move. "You know," I said, casually swirling the cider in my glass, "I have been thinking a lot about that day, the day you found me." They both froze, their smiles disappearing. "We do not have to talk about that anymore, Alex," Mark said quickly. "It is in the past." "No, I want to," I insisted. "I want to get the story straight in my head. So it was definitely the park near the lake?" "Not the bus station?" They exchanged a nervous look. "Yes," Mark said, his voice firm. "The park." "Okay," I said. I took a deep breath. "And you had never seen me before that day? You just found me?" "That is right," Sarah whispered. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. I opened the photo Liam had sent me. The picture of Mark, smiling in front of my real home. I slid the phone across the table to him. "Then can you explain this?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Why were you at my house a week before you found me?" Mark stared at the phone. The color drained from his face. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He was caught. Utterly and completely caught. Sarah leaned over to see the picture. She let out a small, horrified gasp. "Mark, what is that?" "That," I said, my voice rising, the anger I had been suppressing finally breaking free, "is my real house. The house you stole me from. You were there. You were working there. You saw me, you did not find me, you took me. The silence in the room was absolute. It was broken only by Sarah's ragged breathing. She looked from the phone to Mark, her eyes wide with dawning horror. It was possible she had never known the full truth, that she had believed a modified version of the lie Mark had fed her. "Mark?" she whispered. "Tell me he is wrong. Tell me you did not—" Mark could not look at her. He could not look at me. He just stared at the picture on the phone, his entire body trembling. "We loved you," Sarah suddenly shrieked, turning on me, her grief and fear twisting into a desperate, defensive rage. "We just wanted a child. We gave you a good life, a better life." "A better life?" I yelled back, standing up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You ripped me away from my parents. You let them suffer for 16 years, not knowing if I was alive or dead. You do not get to call that a better life. You did it for yourselves, because you were selfish. You do not understand what we went through." Mark finally found his voice. It was a low, guttural roar. He stood up, his fists clenched. "Years of doctors and disappointments. We deserved a child." "You did not deserve me," I shouted. "I was not a prize to be won. I was a person. I was a little boy playing in his own backyard." I pulled out my phone again and opened the email Liam had found. I read it aloud, my voice shaking with fury. "I think I found a way. A little boy who is not being watched properly. We could give him a better life. You planned it. You stalked me. You justified it with this disgusting idea that you would be better parents. You are not parents. You are monsters." Sarah collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "No, no, no." Mark lunged for my phone, his face contorted in a mask of rage and desperation. "Give me that." I pulled it back just in time. "It is too late," I said, my voice suddenly calm and cold. "It is all over." And right on cue, the doorbell rang. The firm, official sound cut through the chaos. Mark froze, his hand still outstretched. Sarah's sobs hitched in her throat. They both knew who it was. Their time was up. I walked to the door and opened it. Detective Miller was standing there, along with the younger officer. He looked past me into the dining room, at the scene of devastation, at the two people whose lives were falling apart. I stepped aside to let him in. "They are ready to talk now," I said. Mark and Sarah just stared, their faces a mixture of shock, defeat, and utter despair. The carefully constructed lie they had lived for 16 years had finally, completely, and irrevocably shattered. The power had shifted. I was no longer their prisoner. I was their accuser, and justice was finally here. The aftermath was a blur of police procedures and legal jargon. Mark and Sarah were arrested that night. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had provided, the photo, the emails, the locket, and their own conflicting stories, not to mention the undeniable DNA match, they confessed to everything. The story they told the police was a pathetic tale of desperation and self-delusion. They had convinced themselves that my real parents, David and Laura, were neglectful for letting me play in the backyard alone for a few minutes. They had used that flimsy excuse to justify a monstrous act. It was the narrative they had created to allow themselves to live with their crime, to sleep at night. But the truth was, they were kidnappers. Nothing more, nothing less. The next day, Detective Miller arranged the meeting. He drove me to a neutral location, a quiet room at the local Victim Services Center. He told me they were waiting inside. My parents, my real parents. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. I was about to meet the two people who had created me, who had loved me and who had lost me. I walked into the room and there they were. They were older now than in the locket photo, their faces etched with the lines of 16 years of grief and worry. But I recognized them instantly. The woman, Laura, had my eyes. The man, David, had my smile. Laura saw me first. Her hand flew to her mouth and a sound escaped her that was half sob, half gasp. David stood frozen for a second, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then they both moved at once, rushing towards me. Laura wrapped her arms around me, holding on so tightly I could barely breathe. She was crying, her tears soaking my shirt, repeating my name over and over again. Ethan. Oh, Ethan. It is you. It is really you. David joined the hug, his big, strong hands on my back. I could feel him shaking. I stood there, stiff and awkward. In the embrace of these strangers who were my family, it was overwhelming. I did not know how to feel. I felt a strange sense of connection, a deep, primal recognition. But I also felt like an outsider looking in. After a lifetime of being Alex, becoming Ethan was not going to be easy. We spent hours talking that day. They told me stories about when I was a baby. They showed me pictures on their phones, hundreds of them, a visual record of a life I had no memory of. They had never changed my room. It was still there, waiting for me, filled with my old toys and clothes, a perfect time capsule of the day I was taken. My mother, Laura, held my hand the entire time as if she was afraid I would disappear again if she let go. My father, David, just kept looking at me, shaking his head and smiling through his tears. I never gave up, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I knew we would find you one day. The journey of becoming Ethan had begun. It was slow and complicated. I moved in with them, into the house I had been stolen from. Sleeping in my old childhood bedroom felt strange, like I was an imposter. My new life was filled with new people. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. A whole family I never knew existed. They were all kind and welcoming, but their joy was tinged with a sadness for all the years we had lost. I still talked to Liam every day. He was my anchor, the one person who knew me as both Alex and Ethan. How are you holding up? He asked me one night over the phone. It is a lot, I confessed. I feel like I am learning to be a different person. I do not know who I am anymore. You are still you, he said firmly. You are still the guy who likes old movies and is terrible at video games. You are Alex, but you are also Ethan now. You do not have to choose. You get to be both. You get to decide what that means. His words helped more than he knew. He was right. I was not erasing Alex. I was adding Ethan to my identity. It was a scar, a part of my story. My relationship with my biological parents was a delicate dance of getting to know each other. My mother would sometimes just watch me, a sad smile on her face. You have your father's laugh, she would say. Or, you make the same face when you are concentrating that you did when you were 2. Each comment was a small bridge, trying to connect the past to the present. I also kept in touch with Detective Miller. He updated me on the legal proceedings. Mark and Sarah had been charged with kidnapping, a federal offense. Their lawyers were trying to argue for a lesser sentence, claiming they had provided a good home, that they had loved me. That will not work, Detective Miller assured me. The evidence of premeditation is too strong. They are going to prison for a very long time. They will pay for what they did. You are free now, Ethan. Free. It was a word I thought about a lot. Was I free? I was free from the lie, yes. But I was not free from the trauma. The betrayal ran deep. It had carved something out of me that I knew would never fully heal. A few months later, just before their trial was set to begin, I decided I needed to see them one last time. I did not tell my parents where I was going. This was something I had to do for myself. I went to the county jail during visiting hours. I sat down in front of the thick plexiglass window and waited. First, they brought Sarah out. She looked terrible. She was pale and thin. Her eyes were hollow and empty. The vibrant woman who had raised me was gone, replaced by this broken shell. She picked up the phone on her side of the glass. Alex, she whispered, her voice raspy. My name is Ethan, I said, my voice cold and hard. She flinched. I am so sorry, she sobbed. We never meant to hurt you. We just loved you so much. You do not know what love is, I said. Love does not steal. Love does not lie for 16 years. What you felt was selfishness. I did not let her say anything else. I motioned for the guard that I was done. They took her away. And a few minutes later, they brought Mark out. He looked older, defeated. The anger and arrogance he had shown during our final confrontation were gone. He just looked tired. He picked up the phone. We sat in silence for a long moment. Why? I finally asked. It was the only question that mattered. Why did you do it? He shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. He could not look at me. We just wanted to be parents, he said, his voice barely audible. That is all we ever wanted. His answer was so simple, so pathetic. It was not an excuse. It was a confession of his own profound weakness. He had seen something he wanted, and he had taken it without any regard for the lives he was destroying in the process. My life, my parents' lives, even his and Sarah's. I stood up. I had heard enough. I did not go there for closure or for an apology I knew would be meaningless. I went there to see them as they truly were. Not as parents, not as saviors, but as my captors. And to let them see me as I truly was. Not their son, but their victim, who had survived their crime and was now free of them. You are not my parents, I said, my voice clear and strong, carrying through the thick glass. You were my jailers. I turned and walked away without looking back. I left them there in their real prison to face the consequences of their actions. They had spent 16 years trying to possess a son. Now they would spend the next several decades with nothing but the memory of what they had lost. They had finally learned what it feels like to have a child taken away from them. And I, Ethan, was finally learning what it felt like to be home.